I'm Martha Zavala, President of the League of Women Voters, the Pasadena area. Welcome to Thursday with the League. Hot topics, cold facts. We hope you're all doing well, staying safe and healthy. We're just 4 weeks away from the election, and by now many of you have received your vote by mail ballots. Today's information will help you decide how to vote for the state and county ballot measures. You may want to follow along on your official sample ballot if you've received it already. If you have any questions on any of the ballot measures as we go through them, please enter them through the Q&A feature in Zoom. Do not wait. Enter your question as it comes up. Also, we wanted to advise you that the event is being broadcast live by Pasadena Media on the Arroyo channel, I believe 32, and on live streaming on Facebook, and will be available, and it will be available, a recording on our YouTube channel in a few days. And now I would like to introduce Robbie Davis. She is a valued member of the League Speakers Bureau and is one of our primary forum facilitator trainers. She is the pros and cons coordinator from our Voter Services Committee. And now I'd like to have Robbie please get us started on the pros and cons.
Welcome again to the Pasadena Area League. And as you probably know, the League's charter is to promote informed and active participation in government and in the political process. We are definitely a political organization, but we never support or oppose candidates or parties. We do take positions on political issues, but only after we've studied them and taken the consensus of our members. And you may have already seen, if you've looked at your voter information guide from the Secretary of State, that the League has taken a position on a number of the measures that we'll be talking about today. As part of our voter service, we can't talk about the reasons why the League has taken a position on a certain measure, but at the end of this presentation, Martha will give you information about how you can find more in depth about what the League thinks about the different measures. So today we will be talking about the 12 state measures and the one county measure, Measure J, that are on your November 3rd ballot. And we will be talking about the details about each measure, what its fiscal effects will be, the supporters and opponents, and what their arguments are. And just to let you know that the arguments that we will be presenting are not the League's arguments. These are arguments that have actually been said by the supporters and opponents. And we do not check those for accuracy or truthfulness. We're just reporting what they have said. And again, if you have questions, we probably will only be able to take at the max 2 questions per measure. Just for time purposes. And if there are questions that I can't answer and our speaker can't answer, we will write those down. They'll be in the Q&A, and we will put together a document that will be on the Pasadena Area League's website, hopefully within the next couple of days, that will have answers to anything that we couldn't answer on the screen. So with that, I think that we will go ahead and start. And what we've done is organize the measures into some categories. And so we're not going to be going through them in numeric order. We'll be going through by category. So our first category is voting rights. And it's Measure 17, Proposition 17. And it is going to be presented by Marna Cornell.
Okay, Proposition 17, everybody, and it's should persons who are on state parole after completing their prison term be allowed to vote. This proposition is pretty straightforward. There's controversy, but it's pretty straightforward. When you are in jail and a misdemeanor, you do not lose your right to vote. But if it is a felony and you are in state prison, you do lose your right to vote, and you don't get your right back when you are on parole, even though you've completed your sentence. So the legislature put this on the ballot, and it's a legislative constitutional amendment To get it on the ballot, it means that the California legislature, that's both the Senate and the Assembly, takes a 2/3 vote of both of them to place this on the ballot. So the legislature was in favor of this. It will affect about 50,000 roughly people. They will have the right to vote if this passes, and if they have the qualifications, they can actually run for office. The fiscal effects on something, let me just give you a little information about what other states do. 2 states, Vermont and Maine, allow every person to vote no matter what involvement in the criminal justice system. The District of Columbia and 16 states restore voting rights to persons on parole. Some states do not restore voting rights until completion of parole. And I think that's about 19 other states. 19 other states do let people on parole vote. I'm sorry. Other states restore rights after a time period. So there's a difference in how states do it. Doesn't come from the federal government. It is something that each state can decide on its own. Now, the fiscal effects of this would be like a one-time thing to register people, and they don't know exactly how much it would cost, and the county would have to change. They would probably have to change some of their questionnaires and things, so there would be a cost, but there's no dollar amount that's given. The supporters' arguments are as follows. Those people who are in favor of it say when a person completes their prison sentence, they should be encouraged to re-enter society and have a stake in their community. Restoring their voting rights does that. Nearly 50,000 Californians who have completed their prison sentences, they pay taxes at the local, state, and federal levels. However, they are not able to vote at any level of government. Parole is intended to be a period of reintegration into the community. People on parole who have completed their prison sentences raise families, they hold jobs, as I mentioned, they pay taxes, and they contribute to society in every other way. Restoring a person's voting eligibility removes stigma and helps strengthen their connection to the community. We can't have an elective government that represents all of us when some members of our community are being excluded from our elections and denied the ability to participate in our democracy. There was a Florida study which found that people who have completed their prison sentences and have their voting rights restored were less likely to commit crimes in the future. Now, going on, these are the opponents' arguments. Proposition 17 will allow criminals convicted of murder, rape, sexual abuse against children, kidnapping, assault, gun crimes, and human trafficking to vote before completing their sentence, including parole. Next, offenders released from prison after serving a term for a serious or violent felony are required to complete parole, and parole is usually 3 years, as part of their sentences. They are monitored and supervised. If the state does not trust them to choose where to live or travel, with whom to associate, and what jobs to do, it must not trust them with decisions that will impact the lives and finances of all other members of society. Crime victims deserve justice. Granting violent criminals the right to vote before the completion of their sentence is not justice. Now, the money, let me tell you about the money. The supporters have come up with about $847,000, and I've looked at that, I think, with just in the last day or two, However, the opponents, and I looked in Voter's Edge and I think Ballotpedia, there's no dollars or a committee raising money in opposition, or at least they haven't raised money. Now, let me give you my last thing I want to let you know. This has always helped me, is who is for this and who is against it. Yes, Governor Newsom, ACLU, Kamala Harris, about 52 organizations, I'm not going to read them all. Black Women Organizing for Political Action, the Brennan Center of Justice, the California Democratic Party, the California Federation of Teachers, the California Psychological Association, the League of Women Voters of California, the LA Times, Pasadena Star News, SEIU, which is Service Employees International Union, State Senator Holly Mitchell, Secretary of State Alex Padilla, and a coalition of political and community organizations, including California nurses. No, all right, there are far fewer to read for no, so you get off on that. California Republican Party votes no. In Bakersfield, California Republican Party wanted their name on here, also of San Diego. And there is something called the Election Integrity Project, a woman named Ruth Weiss, and she turns up on some of these ballot issues as being against. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Marna. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, so I guess you've explained it perfectly. So going along with the next voting rights proposition will be Proposition 18, and that will be presented by Debbie Fagan. Debbie, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present information on Proposition 18. It also is very straightforward, presenting voters with the question, should certain 17-year-old citizens be permitted to vote? To elaborate, Proposition 18 proposes to allow eligible 17-year-olds, eligible defined as those who will be 18 by the next general election, to participate in a full election cycle. 17-year-olds who meet the criteria would then be allowed to vote in the primary and any special election that precedes the next general election. The California legislature, by a 2/3 vote, will let voters decide if this makes sense. It is the 6th time state lawmakers have considered the idea, but only the first time it has come before the voters. If Proposition 18 passes, it would amend the California Constitution. To further understand what is at stake under Proposition 18, one should keep in mind how the California election system works. California holds primary and general elections in even-numbered years. In the primary election, which is held in the spring, voters decide which candidates will compete in the general election. The general election, held in November, determines which people will hold elected office. Currently, in order to vote, a person must be 18 by the time of election. Nationwide, at least 19 states and Washington, D.C. allow 17-year-olds who would be eligible for the next general election to vote early. So what are the fiscal impacts implementing Prop 18 would have? At the county level, cost estimates are between $200,000 and $1 million every 2 years to pay for extra voting materials and election official time. Statewide, a one-time cost is expected to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, or less than 1% of the budget, to upgrade the voter registration systems. So here's what some supporters are saying. Prop 18 will allow 17 to 18-year-olds to participate in a full general election cycle. It will boost the number of youth who actually vote. The identified group are heavily affected by policies, so they should be able to vote on those policies. When 17-year-olds can't vote in the primary, it will discourage them from voting in the general when they're 18 because they didn't pick the candidates that are on the ballot. It will encourage young people to be involved in the lifelong journey of voting, one of the most essential factors in democracy. And here's what some of the opponents are saying. Allowing 17-year-olds to vote in primaries on tax issues and debt issuances is not a right because they have not paid taxes. They will be biased by those who influence them. 17-year-olds are too young to vote and need more life experience before they are ready. 17-year-old brains are not fully developed in the logic and reasoning portions, so they would just be making bad decisions. Schools would persuade 17-year-olds to vote one side or the other by putting up posters or having teachers advocate for certain policies. So here are some of the supporters. The California Association of Student Council, Governor Gavin Newsom and Secretary of State Alex Padilla, the California School Boards Association, and the California League of Conservation Voters. Those opposed to Proposition 18, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers, and the Election Integrity Project of California. Some of the major donors in support of Proposition 18 are the Committee to Innovate for California's Future, it's Assemblymember Evan Lowe's Ballot Measure Committee, Kevin Mullen for Assembly, and Equity California. And there are no donors in opposition, current donors that we know of in opposition. So that concludes my portion, and I hope you found this information useful.
Thank you, Debbie. And we do have one question from one of the audience members. It says, why would this raise costs? Eventually, these same people would have to be added to the voter rolls.
I currently do not have an answer for that.
I think maybe it's, it would raise costs sooner rather than later. That's the only thing I can think about, that, it's doing it sooner. And also doing an update to keep track of who turns 17 or who turns 18 at certain times. But that's the only reason I could think of. So, and I don't see any other questions. So now we are going to move on to a different category, and this new category is property taxes. And the first measure that we're going to talk about is Proposition 15. I'm sure you've seen lots of ads on TV for this already. And our presenter will be Hannah McLaren. So Hannah, you're up.
The question is we're being addressed with in Prop 15 is, should the California Constitution be amended to require that commercial and industrial property be reassessed on a regular basis? That doesn't quite address, it is a good question, but the formal name for this proposition that you will see in your voters registration is increases funding sources for public school community by changing tax assessments of commercial and industrial property. Initiative Constitutional Amendment is an eye-glazing and neutral description of intent. When considering this proposition, it's important to understand the background of this, which is the property tax of 1978, Prop 13. In Prop 13, there are categories of property taxes: business, which is commercial and industrial, agriculture, and personal. Initially, each category was taxed on the same basis, 1% of the sale price, with an annual increase of no more than 2% of that assessment. And there have been several modifications over the years for the personal property taxes, but the original basis has remained the same for all categories. For the most part, businesses, when sold, duly adjusted their property taxes following the original basis, and the commercial property tax obligations matched the new sale price. Depending on various studies, this amounted to approximately 90% of businesses and industrial property. But what was happening was that the remaining 10% of businesses, very large ones or ones that had never sold their land, were able through loopholes cleverly embedded in Prop 13 to create very complex forms of ownership, limited partnerships, limited liabilities, family trusts, publicly paid trading holding companies, et cetera, making the change of ownership very difficult to determine and thus avoiding any increase in their property taxes, and an avoidance that has amounts to billions of dollars. After 1978, as funds for property taxes decreased, local governments began adding fees, trying to make up the lost funds. Taxes on sales, hotels, utilities. This has been going on for 40 years. Were increased. Direct levies were added. In higher education, community colleges and state universities began charging ever-increasing tuitions, and increases in parking tickets, traffic violations, and court fees, which have disproportionately fallen on lower income populations, have appeared as a way to fund the services of the local governments and schools. This has brought us to the situation that we're in today, and the reason for this proposition. Proposition 15 is known as a split roll taxation basis. There are two different taxation bases, one for commercial and industrial, the other for agriculture and personal property. Instead of having property tax be based on sale price, now commercial properties would be assessed every 3 years to determine the market value, what it's worth of the property. And this is the key difference. It's no longer the sale price. It's proposed that it would be the market value, how much it would be sold for, rather than its original sale price. And this is done on every 3 years. Acknowledging the potential impact this may have on small businesses, the proposition makes significant adjustments to business property tax. A tax on equipment used or held by businesses by starting in 2024, reducing such equipment's taxable value by $500,000. So if you can imagine a restaurant, that would be all of the equipment that they have, the refrigerators, the stoves, etc. That's called the business property tax. Further, all business property taxes would be eliminated for those that have 50 or fewer employees. And various studies show that this is approximately 90% of small businesses are really small. Additionally, if the property owner has $3 million or less worth of commercial land in California, this is adjusted for inflation every 2 years, these properties would continue to be taxed based on the original purchase price. So the impact of this is going to affect a very small proportion of small businesses. The county's assessed agricultural property remains assessed on the basis of sale price, and with the reduction of the equipment tax, protects small-scale farmers. So the very large agricultural businesses the land would be assessed on the sale price, but all of the equipment, the very large barns, etc., would be assessed on the business property basis. They would not probably get any kind of a reduction in that amount. The counties assess the properties in their domain over a 3-year period beginning in 2022. Anticipating the need for additional assessors to be hired, the state will advance the funds needed for this. This is done county by county, and then then the state then is reimbursed off the top from the collected funds. This is going to be a very long process. The taxes collected under this proposition are specifically to go to local governments, approximately 60%, and local public school districts, charter schools, and community colleges, 40%. Additionally, there are requirements for annual public accountabilities on how the funds are used. Needless to say, there are organizations and individuals who are proponents and the opposition for this. In opposition are the president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the president of the California Taxpayers Association, and surprisingly, for me, Alice Huffman, president of the California State Conference of the NAACP, among others. Turns out there's some reasons behind that. For the proponents are the SEIU, the California Teachers Association, the League of Women Voters in California, the Advancement Project, and Tony Thurmond, Superintendent of Public Instruction, among a very long list of others. Of note is the reality that it will be several years before schools and communities, the name for Prop 13, will begin receiving the funds. Besides the time needed to complete the audits, go through what might be an extensive appeal process, patience in anticipation is needed. It noted in Tuesday's LA Times editorial for voter recommendations, Proposition 15, the property tax split roll for commercial and industrial real estate, says yes. At long last, there's a fix for one of California's most intractable problems, a wildly unfair and lopsided property tax system that has starved local governments of revenue and distorted the cost of buying a house and starting a business. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. We have, let's see. We have a question. Do franchises count as small businesses even though they are part of a larger company? Example, McDonald's.
I don't know, and I have not found any information in any of the research that deals with that. I would suggest that they probably would be, but there's a very clear sense of accommodation and appeal. So for instance, if you had one franchise and it was worth, then it would be considered. But if you had multiple franchises and you could get over the limits in terms of the $3 million of real estate or property and $500,000 of equipment, you would be considered, a very large small business.
Okay, and
I honestly don't know. I haven't seen franchises per se.
All right, well, that will go on our list of things that will be on our website. Another question is the $3 million evaluation per parcel or cumulative of all property owned by that same owner?
It's cumulative.
Okay.
If it's in California, actually.
Yes, cumulative in California. Okay.
There are a lot of property owners who are not in California. I mean, who do not have bases in California.
Okay.
The land is owned, but so the critical thing is it has to be in California.
Hello, everybody. Proposition 19 contains proposed changes to two parts of the property tax provisions of the Constitution. It was passed by the legislature and placed on the ballot as a constitutional amendment. Existing law allows seniors over 55 and persons with a severe disability and persons whose property has been impacted by a natural disaster to move to a different home without paying higher property taxes. The current law is restricted to cases when the new home is not more valuable than the existing home and lies within the same county or a nearby county as agreed by the counties. Also, this is currently a once-in-a-lifetime benefit. Proposition 19 would expand this tax benefit, allowing the new home to be located anywhere in California and to be of any value, including greater value than the existing home. Furthermore, in the cases of seniors and disabled persons, this benefit, if passed, could be used up to 3 times in a lifetime. The first change would increase real estate sales as more homeowners take advantage of the tax saving. But it would also reduce property tax revenue for local governments and school at the same time. The second change involves inherited property. Existing law, passed as Proposition 58 in 1986 and extended by Proposition 193 in 1996, provided a tax benefit for children or grandchildren if their parents were already deceased by not increasing the assessed value of the inherited family home. Currently, 60 to 80,000 inherited properties a year take advantage of this tax benefit. Proposition 19 would restrict the tax benefit for these transfers to cases in which the children or grandchildren use the transferred property as their principal residence or a farm. Also, if the value of the transferred property is more than $1 million greater than the taxable value, the amount of the benefit would be reduced. This second change would result in increased property taxes on inherited properties in an amount much more than the first change, so that the entire proposition put together would result in increased property tax revenues growing to hundreds of millions of dollars annually. 75% of these gains will be transferred to the California Fire Response Fund and 15% to the County Revenue Protection Fund. The legislative analyst says that in limited situations, total school funding from property taxes and state taxes could be about the same in some years despite schools' property tax gains. This is because existing state law could cause state funding for schools to decrease by about the same amount as their property tax gains. The principal groups in favor of Proposition 19 are associations of realtors and firefighters. These supporters say that Proposition 19 benefits seniors, persons with disabilities, and those whose property is affected by wildfires or other natural disasters by providing them with an opportunity to relocate without having an additional tax burden, while at the same time plugging a well-known tax loophole in which heirs may use inherited property as rental units or vacation homes with an artificially low tax value. Over $25 million has been spent by supporters of this proposition who are principally realtors associations. The opponents include the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association and several newspapers, including the Los Angeles Times and the San Francisco Chronicle. These opponents say that Proposition 19 overturns the large majorities of voters who approve propositions establishing tax benefits for inherited property. They also say it further complicates the property tax law and skews tax breaks away from people who don't own a home or who may be struggling to buy one. And that concludes my presentation on Proposition 19.
Hi, I'm Jane Wallace, and I will explain Proposition 20. Basically, this restricts parole for certain offenses currently considered to be non-violent. It authorizes felony sentences for certain offenses currently treated only as misdemeanors. It is an initiative, which means the voters directly can affect this proposition instead of going through the legislature. Basically, it will do four things. It will reclassify some property crimes as misdemeanors to be increased to felonies. These certain property crimes are considered wobblers. They also, number two, it will increase penalties for people who regularly violate parole. Number three, it will require law enforcement to collect DNA samples from people convicted of misdemeanors of property crimes, And number four, it will double the list of violent felonies that disqualify offenders of violent crimes from early release. So let me give you a little bit of background, because this will repeal some of the previous propositions. The background is that a combination of AB 109, Prop 4, and Prop 57 allowed some defendants to serve sentences in county jails rather than state prisons. It changed the designation of some crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, which changes sentences, and increased opportunities for gaining parole. Prop 47 also directed any money saved by reducing the prison population, which we had an excess prison population. So it reduced that prison population to mental health and drug abuse treatment and victim services. Prop 20 would change various provisions of AB 109, Props 47 and 57, including theft crimes. Prop 47 reduced penalties for certain related crimes from felonies, which are called wobblers, to misdemeanors. The wobblers are considered firearm theft, theft from an elder, identity theft, theft or unauthorized use of a vehicle, unlawful use, sale, or transfer of an account access card, such as credit card or debit card, or forgery of an account access card. The fact that, in support of this proposition, says the fact that domestic abusers, child traffickers, or those who drugged and raped people are technically non-violent offenders who are eligible for early release shows that the current system is flawed and needs to be fixed. The proponents also say that Proposition 47 and 57 led to upticks in crime and that they must be rolled back in order to foster public safety. However, an analysis from the Public Policy Institute of California found some evidence that Prop 47 led to an increase in larceny and thefts from motor vehicles, although it found no evidence that it led to an increase in violent crime. The proponents also say that reclassifying low-level theft and drug crimes inadvertently led to far less DNA collection, so requiring such collection for wobbler offenses would better help law enforcement solve crimes. However, the supporter arguments, and that is for the supporter arguments, that the opponent arguments say that overall crime in California remains low. In LA County, violent crime is at its lowest rate, and property crimes declined in 2019. Recidivism also decreased due to Proposition 47, the Public Policy Institute of California found. Given these trends, opponents ask, why do we need to toughen out our crime laws? Harsh sentencing and tough on crime policies haven't worked in California in the past. Also, particularly in a time when the nation is re-examining policing and criminal justice and their disproportionate effects on Black and Latino communities, opponents say we should focus on how to keep crime rates low and communities safe, instead of pushing more funds into mass incarceration. Prop 20 would cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars annually in law enforcement and correctional facility costs, according to the Legislative Analyst's Office. And opponents say those funds are better invested in communities instead. So let's talk about the fiscal effects. Costs to the state and counties are expected to increase. The shift of some crimes to wobbler status can result in longer prison sentences, leaving more people in jail for longer times, and reducing the opportunities for probation in lieu of jail prison sentences. Changes in terms of supervision can result in more people being returned to jail. Finally, changes to the rules on parole can result in more persons being retained in prison for longer periods of time. All of these considerations combined can result in increased costs for more persons being in jail for longer periods of time. The Legislative Analyst's Office estimates increased state and local correctional costs in the tens of millions of dollars. So who is in support Who gave the most money in support of this? The people who paid most are the donors, the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, Truth in Government Fund, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Employees Benefits Association, and Sempra Energy. The people who donated against, in opposition, major donors included Patty Quilley, Lynn Schusterman, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and Heising Simmons Action Fund. The League also stands in opposition to this proposition. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, we have one question. It says, does Proposition 20 provide human traffickers will be charged with felonies instead of misdemeanors?
Yes. However, yes, that will be probably changed to including human traffickers. That's what this proposition does state.
Thank you very much. Okay, that is the only question I see. And so we will go on to the next criminal justice proposition, which is Proposition 25. And this is an interesting one because it is not a normal proposition, it is a referendum. And so Marilyn Weilander will be explaining the difference as to how that's going to work. Marilyn?
So Proposition 25 is a referendum on law that would replace money bail with a system based on public safety and flight risk. The question, should the law enacted by the California legislature to replace the current money bail system be approved? Here's the situation. In 2018, the legislature passed SB 10, which would do away with the money bail system. That people arrested or arraigned in court might not have to post bail in order to stay free pending their trial. SB 10 did not go into effect because this referendum was filed. The proposal, Proposition 25, would allow SB 10 to go into effect. SB 10 would eliminate the cash bail system. The legislation would replace the cash bail system with risk assessments to determine whether a detained suspect should be released before their trial. To do this, the state would create a system of risk assessments which would categorize suspects as low risk, medium risk, or high risk. Suspects deemed as having a low risk of failing to appear in court and a low risk to public safety would be released from jail, while those deemed a high risk would remain in jail with a chance to argue for their release before a judge. Those deemed a medium risk could be released or kept in jail. In some cases, many people suspected of misdemeanors would be automatically released. The fiscal effects. Proposition 25 would impact both state and local costs, but how much is uncertain and would depend upon how it would be interpreted and implemented. The new release process would increase the workload for state trial courts, district attorneys, and public defenders. These costs could be in the mid-hundreds of millions of dollars annually. On the other hand, there could be reduced jail costs if fewer people are being held in jail for shorter periods of time. What do the supporters say? They say the current system favors rich defendants who can easily make bail and keep poor defendants and defendants of color in jail. Also, people who are eventually found not guilty or not even charged may be stuck with large debts to pay off the bail or the fees. Supporters also say that jail would be reserved for those who need it if this measure would pass. What do the opponents say? The intentions of SB 10 are good, but its provisions may effectively result in more people being jailed than under the current situation. Prop 25 will cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars a year, overburdening courts and creating bureaucracy. Also, opponents say that thousands of jobs in the bail industry would be lost. Now let's look at the finances. These figures are from September 27, obviously this year. Overall, the people who support Proposition 25 There are 44 organizations, 42 elected officials. One of the groups that supports it is the League of Women Voters of California. The people who are supporting no, 51 organizations, elected officials, 82. Well, let's look at the money. There's a total of $8.341 million that's been raised in support of this proposition. You probably know the name Ballmer. Steve Ballmer was the former CEO of Microsoft. He and his wife each donated $2.5 million in support of this. Also, John Arnold, who has a real estate firm, is in support of this. SEIU, Patty Quillen, whose husband is the CEO of Netflix, and various other groups are in support of it and have donated money. The opposition has donated $6.065 million, and it's a group, it's many, many different bail bonds people. Aladdin bail bonds, surety bail bonds, insurance company, surety company. So, but all the names appear to be insurance companies or bail bonds people.
Thank you, Marilyn. And let's see, do we have any questions? Oh, okay. So it says, who creates the assessment? And I assume this means who creates the rules for who is likely or unlikely to
Thank you.
be a risk.
It says the state would create a system of risk assessments which would categorize suspects as low risk. And I believe it would be the sentencing organization that would look at those risk assessments to make that determination.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And no more open questions. And we have somebody here that has just said, please state if the league supports each measure or not. And we're going to hold that information until the end of the of this whole presentation. We have to keep a strict division between our voter service and our advocacy. And so at the end of this, Martha will tell you where to get the information about how to find what the league's positions are on all of the measures. So that's something that will come at the end of this presentation. So we have one more criminal justice proposition. Actually, it's the County Measure J. And Ann Zeiss will be talking about County Measure J.
Good morning. Measure J is the proposed county charter amendment that was called for by the Board of Supervisors of the County of Los Angeles. The measure, as it appears on the ballot, is titled Community Investment and Alternatives to Incarceration Minimum County Budget Allocation. The question is, shall the measure annually allocating in the county's budget no less than 10% of the county's locally generated unrestricted revenues in the general fund to address disproportionate impact of racial injustice through community investment in alternatives to incarceration and prohibiting using those funds for carceral systems and law enforcement agencies as detailed in the ordinance adopting the proposed charter amendment be adopted. It would amend Section 11 of Article III of the County of Los Angeles Charter to require at least 10% of locally controlled revenue, approximately $1 billion, B $4 billion, to be invested into local community and alternatives to incarceration. There would be eligible and ineligible uses of these, but the Board of Supervisors would adjust and approve the use of these funds within the voter-approved constraints on an annual basis. Measure J will be clear that the use of any of these earmarked funds for carceral systems and any law enforcement agencies is strictly forbidden. It is important to understand that the revenue for this measure comes from the county's locally generated unrestricted revenues in the general fund and does not come from law enforcement budget. Currently, Los Angeles County spends 1.75 B for billion dollars, or 42% of taxpayer money, on law enforcement in the legal system. Measure J would provide new funding for community health, mental health services, youth development programs, small businesses, jobs creation, and affordable housing. It will structurally change the budget. The revenues set aside for this purpose shall phase in over a 3-year period beginning July 1, 2021, growing to the full set aside by June 30th of 2024. These revenues do not replace, repeat, do not replace existing monies already allocated for same category use. The Board of Supervisors shall establish an inclusion and transparent process of allocation of these funds. It is important to note that in the event of a fiscal emergency that threatens the county's ability to fund these mandated programs, the Board of Supervisors may reduce the set-aside revenues by a 4/5 vote. And I have no supporter or opposition information in the research that I did. Thank you very much, and you don't need to be reminded to vote.
Thank you very much, Anne. The supporters that I have seen that are listed, basically the supporters are the 4 county supervisors who voted for this. Janice Hahn, Sheila Kuehl, Mark Ridley Thomas, and Hilda Solis. And then the opponents are the supervisor who voted against it, who is Catherine Barger, and also County Sheriff Alex Villanueva. So those are the opponents.
Thank you.
And any other questions? Okay, we have a question that says, I am confused. Measure J is not listed in the official voter information guide, and that's because it's a local measure. So the only measures that are in the voter information guide from the Secretary of State are the ones that are state measures. So that's why. But when you get your sample ballot, if you have not already, Measure J will be in your sample ballot.
Thank you.
And okay, and then we have another question, somebody that joined late, and will it be possible to listen to the recording? Yes, there will be. This is being recorded, and you will be able to listen to it, I believe, through our website. So that takes care of Measure J. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
We are now going to go to a different category of measures, consumer issues. And the first one that we're going to do is Proposition 21, and that will be done by Michelle White. Michelle?
Good morning. Proposition 21 seeks to expand the authority of local governments to enact rent control on residential properties. A little background would be helpful because rent control has been a source of heated debate for many years. Between in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of increase in rental properties, and 13 California cities adopted rent control. A lot of 1976, there was a ruling that as long as rent control measures were designed to make sure that rents did not become excessive and the landlords were given just and reasonable returns on their property, rent control was considered constitutional. There was a long period of time during which Senator Roberti protected rent control measures in the state. However, he termed out in 1995, and that's when the current law that is in effect went into effect. It's called the Costa-Hawkins Law. It prohibits rent control being used on individual single-family dwellings, including condos. It exempts all housing that was built after February of 1995 from rent control, and it allows landlords to escalate the rent that is being charged to a new tenant when there has been a vacancy. It's called vacancy decontrol. Prop 21 would change some of that, and it is against the backdrop of a long and continuing shortage of housing in California. We have 5 or 6 of the 11 most costly rental markets in our state. In addition to that, renters, more than 50% of renters pay 30% or higher of their income for rent. And that is the 30% standard is established by HUD as the amount that one should be spending on rent, so it allows you to have food and medicine and all the other things. Almost 1/3 of the renters in California pay more than 50% of their income on housing. And if you take a look at the San Gabriel Valley, those standards pretty much flow through to our immediate population. Although for sale housing did drop in price and became more affordable during the recession, rental housing did not. And we also had that exacerbated by institutional investors who bought up foreclosed upon starter homes and put them back on the market as rentals, and they escalated the price and made it even more unaffordable in California. Recently, there was a Prop 10 in November of 2018. It would have repealed Costa-Hawkins. It was defeated by 59% of the vote. And this is a second try by essentially the same group to put rent control on the ballot. Prop 21 would amend Costa-Hawkins in the following ways. It would not repeal it, it would amend it. That is a change between what we have now and Prop 10. Instead of eliminating all of the properties, it would allow all of the properties, from 1995, under Costa-Hawkins, if your building was built after 1995, you cannot have rent control on it. Now they would change that to if your building is more than 15 years old, then the owners are allowed to, the municipalities are allowed to cover it under a rent control provision. In addition, under Prop under Costa-Hawkins, you may not do anything with regard to any single-family dwellings by putting them under rent control. And this would change it to any properties where any owners who have more than 2 units, they would be subject to rent control if the local municipality decided to do so. It would also put into effect a limited form of vacancy control. And by that I mean that it would allow landlords who have had a tenant in a property for 3 or more years to elevate the rent to the next tenant by 15%, by up to 15%. And this could be done during the first 3 years of the occupancy. It also requires, and this is not a change, that landlords receive a fair rate of return. The fiscal impacts, according to the analyst's office, is that it would reduce the value of property. It would have declines in the amount of housing that is available. Maintenance would probably decline because landlords would not want to put very much into maintenance, and some tenants, and on the beneficial side, some tenants would pay less in rent and that they would spend that locally. So you'd have, as a fiscal impact, less money going into property taxes, but more money going into sales taxes, and they could not fully assess what the impact would be. The supporters say that communities are unique and that municipalities are capable of deciding whether controls ought to go into place and what kinds there should be. They also point to the fact that seniors are most vulnerable these days because they're on a fixed income, and that there is very little flexibility for a lot of families, and many become homeless when their rents go up too high. The Dolores Huerta Foundation and many other organizations are supporting this, especially the AIDS Foundation, Healthcare Foundation. There has been about $23 million put into this, and largely from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. The opponents say that it will make affordable housing even less available and more costly, that we've already decided this just 2 years ago. There's no reason to bring it up again, and that new housing will not be built. This will cost us jobs and hurt the economy. Notable among the opponents is the NAACP, but there is some report that there have been consultant fees paid to the president of the NAACP that may have impacted this position. $26 million has been put into the opposition of this. So the idea, if you are in favor of local governments being able to impose rent control, and if you're in favor of a change in the vacancy decontrol situation that we have right now, you should vote in favor of this. If you think that things should stay the way they are, then you should vote against it. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And I'm looking in the Q&A, and I don't see any questions. So we're going on to the next consumer issues proposition, and I'm going to do that one myself. This is Proposition 24. and it deals with consumer privacy. So the question is, should California's consumer privacy laws be amended to change criteria for which businesses need to comply and to increase penalties for violations and to create a new $10 million state enforcement agency? So the background on this is, of course, that all of us increasingly rely on technology like Zoom. This increased reliance has made users concerned that the corporations that we rely on have access to massive amounts of our personal data, and we don't know which data, and we don't have any control over what the corporations are doing with it. So in 2018, the legislature passed the California Consumer Privacy Act, and that is intended to help protect consumers and also allow them to see what kinds of data are being collected. So the Act has some stipulations about who it applies to. It applies to businesses that earn more than $25 million a year in revenue. It applies to any business that buys, sells, or shares data from 50,000 individuals, devices, or households. And it applies to businesses that earn 50% or more of their annual revenue from selling personal data. So any businesses that fall into one of those categories has to notify their customers that their data are being collected. They have to comply with personal privacy rights, and they're not supposed to treat customers differently if they don't want their data shared. And if the businesses violate these rules, they can be fined. So the proposal, Proposition 24, and it runs to 52 pages. It would make the following changes to the law that was passed in 2018. For one thing, it would raise the device count, which we, before, or currently it says if a business buys, sells, or shares data for 50,000 individuals, devices, or households, then they're under the law. This takes away the individuals and households and just says devices, and it raises the cap to 100,000. So that means that fewer companies would be covered by these laws. Prop 24 would also set up what is called basically an opt-out system rather than an opt-in. So customers could tell businesses that not to use their personal data, and they could request corrections to the data, but because it's an opt-out, you are assumed to accept the fact that these companies use your data unless you specifically tell them to opt out, and you would have to do that for each individual website, and you couldn't just do a global opt-out for all the different companies. So this would be a little more of a burden. Proposition 24 would triple a fine, going from $2,500 to $7,500 for a corporation that violates a minor's privacy rights. And also, this proposition would create a new state agency that would take over some of the enforcement responsibilities from the State Department of Justice. So the fiscal implications of this, the legislative analyst, who's the nonpartisan office up in Sacramento, says that Proposition 24 would take about $10 million a year from the general fund to finance this new enforcement agencies. But they say that other fiscal impacts would be difficult to predict. There might be more court costs to the state because there would be prosecution of violators, but those court costs might be offset by fines that the companies would have to pay. They also say that data breaches where someone goes in and hacks a company and steals a lot of the personal data, those are very costly, but it's uncertain how these new laws would prevent, if Proposition 24 were to pass, how that would prevent any additional data breaches other than maybe trying to force companies to better protect their customer data. So the supporters of Prop 24 include the California NAACP, an organization called Californians for Consumer Privacy, and another organization called Common Sense Media. And the supporters of Prop 24 say that it would prevent businesses from using or sharing sensitive data such as health, finances, ethnicity, their location, things like that. They say that Prop 24 would strengthen existing protections that were created by this California Privacy Protection agency that they propose should be started. And the supporters say that this is passed by an initiative, if it were to pass, and so it's less vulnerable to pressure by lobbyists on legislators, because legislators passed the original act, but if the Prop 24 is passed, it would be passed by the people. So as to date, about $5.4 million has been contributed in support of Prop 24, and almost all of it is by a gentleman named Alastair McTaggart. He's a wealthy Bay Area real estate developer, and he's the one that actually forced the legislature to pass the 2018 law, but he is concerned that because it was passed by the legislature, it's more vulnerable to pressure from lobbyists. So he wants this actually to be a statement by the people. The opponents of Proposition 24 include a group called Californians for Privacy Now, the Consumer Federation of America, and Dolores Huerta and her group. And the opponents say that Prop 24 puts the burden on consumers to opt out of having their data shared. And that has to be done one company at a time. So they're saying that's a burden. They say that there is hidden economic discrimination, since people with less money will be unable to pay for loyalty programs, and will get worse connections, slower downloads, more ads. And they say that Proposition 24 would allow employers to keep gathering data, sensitive data about their employees, such as pregnancies, religion, or political activism. And last time I checked, only about $45,000 has been collected against Proposition 24. So the question is, should California's consumer privacy laws be amended, and for which companies have to apply, additional penalties, and then this new $10 million state enforcement agency would be created. So any questions? I'm looking. Nope, I don't see any questions. So we now go to the miscellaneous category. There's a lot of propositions that don't fit into any of the categories. So the first one is Proposition 14. It has to do with stem cell research, and Marna Cornell will be once again presenting Proposition 14. Marna? Marna, are you there?
Okay, here I am. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, Prop 14 is the only one where bonds are involved, where we are buying, and as it says, $5.5 billion in general obligation bonds. Of course, most of you probably know when you buy a bond, whatever the face value is, you're going to get interest for that. So the cost of this will go up as time goes on. So the question, as she stated, is that, and it is the only one sort of that I think of all these propositions, is about continuing something that we are already doing now. In about 2004, Prop 71 was passed, and the situation was because I believe Bush administration was against stem cell research. So they would not approve any of it on a national federal level. So California decided we did want to go forward with that, and we would do that as a state. And so we have done so. Now the money's running out. So that is why we have Prop 14. Is the question is also, do we want to continue funding this, or is this something we think we do not want to continue funding? When it says 5.5 billion, it will end up costing about 7 point something billion. But for the first 5 years, it will be paid for by the bondholders. Money will not come from the general fund until about 2026. And that will cost, some people have figured out, about $5 a year for each person in California to do that. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money to us to give each year to pay for this. But when you say we have a 200, I think our June budget in California was $202 billion. And this is about $260 million per year, starting after the first 5 years. So it won't start immediately. What is left now, which also sounds like a ton of money to me, but for this kind of research to keep it going, it isn't. And it's only 30 million left. And so that's the idea, that we will sell bonds to continue stem cell research. The fiscal effects I have taken care of. You have to repay that. The original legislation established something called the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. And that was started. And so it would mean using that organization to continue this. And however, we do get a little money. Grant recipients who license or sell their inventions are required to share a portion of the income they get from these inventions with the state. So that's kind of basically the situation on that. Now, supporters say stem cell research is a critical area of medical advancement that is discovering therapy breakthroughs and cures for currently incurable diseases and injuries. Second, the U.S. National Institute of Health has partnered with California's Stem Cell Funding Institute to advance therapies because of California's track record of success. Funding research for new therapies and cures is from bonds, not a tax. And as I say, it would equal less than $5 per person annually with no state payments until 2026, which would be the 6 years of California's economic recovery. These new treatments and cures could restore health and reduce healthcare costs for Californians and everybody, I assume, when they are found. California funding is essential because funding from Washington, D.C. is unpredictable and unreliable. Under Obama, he reversed this. He said, you know, it's about hope. We should fund some, but the funding is iffy. So also under this funding that we have done, 2,900 medical discoveries and 92 FDA-approved clinical trials have happened, and it has gotten high marks from the Citizens Financial Accountability Oversight Committee, chaired by the California Controller. Economic job recovery stimulus has a proven history, and it is said from this has resulted about $10.7 million in economic stimulus, and tens of thousands of new jobs have been created because of this research. I think that pretty much covers the supporters. The opponents say we cannot afford the $7.3 billion ticket, which would be due in 30 years for this proposition, particularly in the middle of an economic crisis, and repayment of the bonds will increase taxes. Two, previous funding has not yielded the promised results for treatments or economic benefits. Private investors and companies have made great strides in stem cell research and cures. 3, independent analysis and news outlets have questioned the management, integrity, and transparency of the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. Now, this proposition to me is unique because on the pro side, I looked it up, there are 97 organizations and people who support this. And I'm not going to read you 97. A good 70 of those are patient organizations. And most of them, you know, you'll recognize that it's Alzheimer's for women or Alzheimer's for something. You'll recognize Parkinson's. You'll recognize Christopher Reeve's organization for his kind of injury, Michael Fox's organization. So that is primarily, all those are really in favor of this. The LA County Democratic Party is in favor of this. Governor Newsom is in favor of this. University of California Board of Regents is in favor of this. One supervisor has signed on, Sheila Kuehl. A lot of doctors, and what they say are doctors, comma, Nobel Prize winning scientists have signed on to this. Robert Klein, who is the person who is kind of the chair of this, a real estate investor and founder of CIRM, which is the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. He is, of course, in favor of this. And the spending on this has been about $8.4 million. And this is another interesting thing. I looked it up again to be sure I had it right. No committee opposing Proposition 14 has raised enough money to reach the reporting threshold. That doesn't mean there wasn't some money, and this is from Voters Edge a while ago. So that pretty much does it. I think I've covered it. Thank you for your attention and that you're still hanging in there. I haven't seen participants go down, and I'm wondering, oh boy, you're taking a lot in, you're getting a lot of good brain cells. So thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much, Marta. We are running a little bit behind schedule. So what I think I'm going to do is just take note. We're going to take note of all the questions that are in the Q&A, and we will answer them on our website later on. And again, if people have to leave for some reason, you can watch for the end of this on our YouTube channel, and it will be available shortly. So got to move right along. The next miscellaneous item is Proposition 16, and it's affirmative action, and we will have Michelle White again talk about Prop 16.
Okay, I'll try to rip through this. Okay, basically it is the perennial argument about whether affirmative action is reverse discrimination. This is a legislative constitutional amendment that was voted on by 2/3 of the legislature to be on the ballot, and it raises the question of whether the Constitution should be amended to allow state and local governments to consider diversity as one of the factors in when they consider public employment, education, and contracting decisions. So we've got equal protection laws on both the federal and state level. I won't go into a lot of that, but essentially affirmative action is now permitted on the federal level with certain restrictions. You have to have a compelling interest and it has to be narrowly tailored. All of these programs have to be narrowly tailored. On the state level, affirmative action has effectively been eliminated pursuant to Prop 209. which went into effect in 1996. And pursuant to this, the state and any of its local governments or commissions may not take into account or give preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the operation of its public employment, public education, or public contracting. And like I said, the state includes all of its commissions and departments. So this came about as a rebellion against affirmative action, and it started with Ward Connolly and Governor Pete Wilson and the California Republican Party that contributed about $500,000 back in 1995, and the proposition was passed. But now we've had over 20 years of experience with it, and we find that Black workers are twice as likely to be unemployed. Black boys, when they grow into adulthood, are likely to have less money, likely to make less money than their white counterparts in 99% of the census tracts in California. And there's a gender gap. Women make about 82 cents for every dollar that men do. The likelihood is, if we keep going the way we are, it's going to take white women until 2059 to achieve pay equity. Black women, it'll take them until 2030, and Latinas until 2224. So those who are in favor of trying to do this, trying to repeal 209, says we need to take into account this historic moment that we're in, that we need to make equal opportunities available to people. And despite the fact that we are the most diverse state in the United States, we still have people experiencing significant discrimination. The supporters include the League of Women Voters, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, NAACP, ACLU, and other groups. Opponents say that to approve this would be a step backwards. It's just another form of discrimination based upon the politics of the time. It perpetuates the myth that in order for Black or brown people to make it in the United States, they have to have a affirmative action, and that you need a bureaucracy to implement this. The opponents include Ward Connolly and a number of other groups, some of which identify themselves as civil rights attorneys. So the question is, should the California Constitution be amended to allow state and local governments to consider diversity as factors in public employment, education, and contracting decisions? If you're in favor of getting rid of 209, you vote in favor. You vote yes. If you want to keep things the way they are now, you vote against it, and that's it. I did not find fiscal information on this, so I can't report on that.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Our next miscellaneous is Proposition 22, and you've probably been seeing a lot of this on television, a lot of ads. It has to do with the rideshare and delivery drivers, and Roger Weilander will be presenting Proposition 22.
Yes. Proposition 22, the one you have been seeing on TV, exempts app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers. So the question is, should app-based rideshare and delivery companies should their drivers be classified as independent contractors, not employees, and should rideshare and delivery companies be required to adopt labor and wage policies unique to these drivers? So rideshare companies in California, both the rideshare and delivery companies, have allowed customers to hire them via their phone apps. Between 800,000 and 950,000 Californians currently are driving for these companies. These drivers are able to choose when they work and where they work, but have to provide their own vehicle and cover their vehicle expenses. Most of them are part-timers and earn between $11 and $16 an hour. About 70% of these drivers are individuals who are minorities. So the rideshare companies hire them as an independent contractor, people who work for the business but are not employees. Therefore, they are not entitled to legal protections, including minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, or workman's compensation. To address this issue, in 2019, the state of California passed AB 5, which limits the ability of companies to hire workers as independent contractors. And they are to be classified as employees. The rideshare companies, therefore, must provide normal employee benefits to these drivers. At this point, the state of California has 2 lawsuits against 2 of the companies who have simply ignored this law. So, Proposition 22, it would reclassify the app-based drivers as independent contractors, not employees. Drivers would not receive employee benefits and protections, including minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, or workers' compensation. However, in this proposition, they would receive some minimum wage. It would be 120% of what the minimum wage is in the area where they drive. They would get a healthcare subsidy, and the healthcare subsidy would be an uncertain amount of money donated by the companies towards their health insurance. They would be covered if they have an accident, which they currently aren't covered. As a driver, they would be covered for medical costs if they were in an accident, and they would not be allowed to drive more than 12 hours a day. Other requirements would be that there would be prohibit workplace discrimination and require that companies develop sexual harassment policies, conduct criminal background checks, and mandate safety training for drivers. Proposition 22 would also prohibit local jurisdictions from setting their own rules for rideshare and delivery companies, such as a higher minimum wage. So the fiscal effects of this, there would be an anticipated lower cost and higher profits for the rideshare and delivery companies if AB 5 is put out of business by this proposition being passed. And drivers and stockholders would pay more income tax because theoretically more money would be made. The supporters of this, they say that to classify drivers as employees as required under AB 5 would lead to longer wait times for individuals who need the service. It would lead to higher prices and less access to rideshare and delivery services. Like AB 5, supporters say that Prop 5 would improve delivery and rideshare work by requiring companies to provide new benefits and expand public safety protections. The opponents, Prop 22 would eliminate basic workplace protections and replace them with lower guaranteed earnings and healthcare subsidies to save costs for the company. And current law does not limit driver flexibility because a majority of drivers work 30 hours or more per week. The 30 hours was a study done strictly in the Bay Area. In the rest of the state of California, the estimate is that most drivers drive between 15 and 20 hours a week. Okay. So the money, where does the money come from? Yes, on Proposition 22, the total money they raised is $185 million. And the money came from Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and Postmates. An individual, Kylie for Assemblyman, added $200. Okay, no on Proposition. They have raised $12 million. And this is the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, the Service Employees International Union, UFCW Local 770, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, the California Labor Federation, State Building and Construction Trades, Transportation Workers of America. All the unions are against this. One thing to add to this, one of the main questions that comes up is, does this cover everybody who works part-time? And no, it covers only, AB 5 covers only people who are involved in app-based. There's a very long list of exemptions which we have available. Okay, are there any questions?
I'm looking in the Q&A box and I don't see any. So we have one more. So hang in there, everybody. Our last proposition is Proposition 23, has to do with dialysis clinics, and our presenter will be Margan Zadowitz. Margan.
Good morning. This is the last proposition of the morning. The question is, should outpatient dialysis clinics be required to have a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant on site when patients are being treated? Should they offer the same level of care to all patients regardless of insurance compensation? Should they notify and obtain consent from the state health department before closing or reducing services? And should they report dialysis-related infections? The background of this, and I should say that this is on the ballot because of a petition. The background is that patients with end-stage renal disease require dialysis to stay alive and often while they're awaiting kidney transplant. About 80,000 Californians receive dialysis at one of 588 dialysis clinics annually. Two corporations, DaVita Kidney Care and Fresenius Kidney Care, own and operate 72% of the dialysis clinics in the state, earning about $3 billion annually. Medicare pays for most dialysis, as patients with end-stage renal disease have been eligible for Medicare since 1973. Patients who have private health insurance must use private health insurance for the first 30 months of dialysis. On average, private insurance pays 4 times what Medicare pays. Medi-Cal also covers dialysis. The payment rates for Medicare and Medi-Cal are set by regulation and are close to the average cost for a patient, thereby limiting the profit margin of the dialysis company. Proposition 23 has 4 requirements. First, there must be a licensed physician, nurse practitioner, or PA present during the time that the patients receive dialysis. Second, dialysis-related infections must be reported to the state and federal government, and dialysis-related infections are fairly common and can be quite serious. The state of California must approve any closure or reduction in services. And fourth, dialysis clinics may not discriminate against patients based on their health insurance. Some of you may remember that Proposition 8 in November 2018 also dealt with dialysis clinics. The only common requirement with Proposition 23 was the requirement to not discriminate against patients based on their health insurance. Prop 8 was defeated by a vote of 60 to 40%. So the fiscal impacts of this proposition are estimated to be that there would be increased state and local government costs in the low tens of millions of dollars annually. There would be some increased cost to dialysis companies in order to pay the physician, the nurse practitioner, or the physician's assistant. The new data reporting costs would be negligible. Supporters of this proposition say that patients should have access to a physician on site whenever dialysis is being provided. They also say that proper reporting and transparency of infection rates encourages clinics to improve quality. They further say that no one should be discriminated against because of the kind of health insurance they have, and that strong protection should be provided against closing of clinics, since patients are literally dependent on their treatment. The opponents to this say that Proposition 23 would force dialysis clinics to cut services or close, putting lives at risk. That Proposition 23 would make the physician shortage worse and lead to more crowding in emergency rooms. And lastly, they say that dialysis clinics are already strictly regulated and provide high quality care. They are in fact regulated by the federal government, by CMS. So the people who are for this are a coalition of people called Better Care for Dialysis Patients that includes the California Democratic Party, SEIU, United Healthcare Workers West, and the California Labor Federation. The people who are against this, in a coalition called Stop the Dangerous and Costly Dialysis Proposition, include a broad coalition of doctors, nurses, businesses, and chambers of commerce. There is considerable funding associated with this proposition. The supporters have put forth $6 million, and that has come from SEIU Healthcare Workers, United Healthcare Workers West. But the opponents have put forth $93 million, and that money has come from DaVita, Fresenius Kidney Care, and U.S. Renal Care. And I should also mention that there is some evidence that there may be an ongoing effort to unionize dialysis healthcare workers. And that's the end of Proposition 23.
Thank you, Morgan. And I'm looking in the Q&A box, and I don't see any questions relating to this. So we made it through all 12 state propositions and the county measure. And so right now, I would like to thank everybody, those of you who have hung in there for all this time. And I would like to turn this now over to our president, Martha Zavala, who will make some closing information. Martha?
I thank you so much, Robbie Davis, and our wonderful speakers, Marna Cornell, Debbie Fagan, Hannah McLaren, Bob Pendleton, Jane Wallace, Michelle White, Roger Weilander, Morgan Zadowitz, and Ann Zeiss. Thank you for making this really informational session possible. And I also want to thank Catherine Gadsby and Gail Oswald, working behind the scenes and actually gearing up to have us all ready for this event. So thank you very much for making it possible also. Thank you to Pasadena Media for helping us reach more voters, which is very critical right now and very important to us. If you really do want to find out how to vote with the League, you can actually go to our state League website, so LWVC.org, and there will be a section there that's called Vote with the League. You can look there and we will tell you why we are supporting or opposing or maybe don't have a position on a particular ballot measure, but you can get that information there. And now I want to urge you to please access our October voter. Go to our website. In there, we have ways for you to volunteer to help us get out the vote, because it's very important that everybody get their voice heard this November. We hope you will volunteer to staff our voter hotline, which is also in the October voter, and our phone bank, where we are going to be calling voters in our service area and urging them to go ahead and vote, because it's really important that their voices get represented. These are low propensity voters, as I mentioned, and they really have to have their say. So please consider volunteering with us. Just do as is instructed in our voter. Also, I want to advise you to return your ballot early. It's very important that you read your sample ballot. I'm hoping that you all did receive it along with your vote by mail. It really has a lot of information to answer a lot of your questions, but if you still have questions, you can email us or call us at our office, which you can also find on our website, how to contact us. So if you don't find the answer there, we'll get an answer for you. And remember that you can return your vote by mail ballot in 3 ways: by U.S. mail. The U.S. Postal Service has indicated that they can deliver ballot within 5 to 7 days. As you know, they're having difficulty in some places gearing up. But if you submit your vote by mail ballot and have it postmarked by the November 3rd or earlier, as I said, the earlier you do it, the better it will be for all of us. If you can get your ballot mailed in, or you can drop it off personally at a drop box that's located near where you live. You just go to lavote.net and it will tell you where all the local drop boxes are, so that you can feel confident that it's being handed over directly into where the registrar recorder will actually pick up the mail from the drop boxes. And you can also hand carry it into a vote center. They'll be open as early as October 24th, somewhere near you. And so we urge you to go ahead and do that. You have as much information as possible on the ballot measures, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to go to our Voters Edge website. Just type in Voters Edge. It is something that's provided by the California League, and you may find more information about the candidates that show up on your ballot, the local measures, the local candidates. And so you can do that. What we also would urge you to do is to help spread the word that the results of the popular vote nationwide and here in LA County will be a snapshot in time on election night. So whatever you're seeing there, it's going to take time before the election can be called. So be patient. Late results do not imply fraud. It reflects the effort to make sure that everyone's vote counts. So they're going to do signature verification and various things. You may be unaware that there are 5.6 million registered voters in LA County. They have all been sent a vote by mail ballot. All of those ballots will be verified to make sure it's a valid ballot. So that is going to take time. And again, no indication of fraud. It's just an effort to make sure everybody's voice is heard and their vote is counted. So I really do want to thank you very much for all of you spending your Thursday morning with us again. And we hope that you are going to join us on November 5th for our next Thursday with the League. That'll be 2 days after election night, and we'll see what we can report then. And then to please visit our suggested websites that are going to be pictured on the screen. You can use your cell phones to read the QR codes. You can also take a picture of that screen if you want to do it later, but you'll have that opportunity to follow up and follow some of the websites that we have there available for you. So again, we're going to leave the screen up and have a wonderful afternoon and weekend. Thank you for joining us.